And we are live.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Awakening Educator. My name is Megan Sweet.
And I'm Susan Andrian.
And I'm so excited today to welcome Cherie Bridges Patrick, who will be talking with us about ways to address racism, equity, and using a trauma-informed lens or trauma to be as a part of that. I'm bungling it, Cherie. So I'm going to have you guys describe what you do. I'm watching your face, and I'm like, I'm getting it all. I'm not saying
You
it
know
right.
what? I love it. I love it. I appreciate this. So I'll be talking about racial trauma, social trauma, and then the need for safety, right?
Wonderful.
And to talk about safety and how that is critical to justice work.
I'm so excited that you named that in particular, and in a moment I'll have you introduce yourself more formally, because it's something that Susan and I have talked about a lot. That if for us to actually have conversations about identity, about trauma, about what happens in our culture, implicit bias, all the things that we really need to have conversations about, safety is such a fundamental baseline. If folks don't feel safe to show up at themselves or tell their truths, then we're actually never going to get. We're not going to get out of the gate. We're just not going to. So I'm looking forward to talking with you about that. Before we jump in, could you introduce yourself a little bit more? What you do?
Sure. Yep. So I first want to honor my ancestors. So I'm a leadership coach, a consultant educator, and I use neuroscience to help professionals. I help people who help other people and organizations establish safety, develop neural resilience, that's muscle, normalize generative dialogue around tough topics like race, and then to heal relationships that have been harmed by racial and social trauma. So that's me. And a little bit more, my life has been about trauma and healing, right? And so I take a very, very selfish approach to my work. And I tell folks that the work that I do is primarily for me, right? Because I want to live a more liberated life. And so in doing that, I take care of myself. So me comes me first, right? And that sounds very selfish, but what I believe is that I have to be able to be, to be in a place to navigate this topic. If I'm always looking to help other people, I miss that important piece. I am a tool, right? I'm a resource. I walk with people on their journeys, right? So I don't believe in asking people to do something that I haven't done. And so, I know trauma, I know mental illness, I know its impact, and I know the transformation that comes with healing and growth. So, I've lived it, I study it, I teach it, and it's just so important for me as a person to embody that. I'll pause there.
Well, this is like everything you're talking about resonates so much for me. I've been, as many of our listeners know, I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist focusing primarily on trauma in Oakland and really looking at the impact of historical and racialized trauma and systemic oppression in our communities and how that continues to impact kids and families every day. And been growing my understanding of neuroscience. So I'm becoming a little bit of a neuro nerd around this. It's so fascinating and exciting.
Yes.
Been training with Dr. Bruce Perry for the last couple of years. And we had him on the show a couple of years ago and just really thinking about how understanding that we are all carrying around these wounds with us.
Yes.
No matter who we are.
Yes.
That if we don't take the time to stop and heal those wounds, we will continue to harm each other day in and day out, and we will continue to harm our children as they come into schools and school communities. And so I think this work is incredibly important, and that shifting this idea to healing as liberation and that community work has to be healing work, that social justice work has to be healing work, or we're just going to fry ourselves out. So
right.
I'm excited about this conversation, and I know Megan is too. And you were about to say something, Megan, and I cut you off with my enthusiasm. I'm sorry.
Well, I was enthusiastic too. I've been looking forward to talking with Cherie, so I'm excited. You said a few things in addition to what Susan said that I'm wondering if you could go a little bit deeper on because it's something we talk about a lot. I wrote about it in my book, which is we're doing this work. We have to do this work for ourselves, and we need to put ourselves first and take care of ourselves first, which, as you know, is counterintuitive to folks in our field. And so I'm wondering, how did you come to that? And maybe can you talk a little bit more about why we need to start with ourselves first?
Sure.
Yeah.
So thank you for that question. And I realized that I failed to say I'm a clinical social worker too, right? So I am a therapist, right? And so I think that's really important. But the trauma, as we understand it, and you all, I think, y'all will get this. It separates us from ourselves. It disconnects us from ourselves, right? And so, we are taught to give to others, to be selfless, right? And it is absolutely essential for us to first do this work, because I think this is how we reproduce harm when we haven't done our own work, especially as it relates to anything concerning race, right? That very tough topic that we just can't seem to get to and get and get into and heal. And so and because trauma impacts the body, right? When I'm talking about something that I want to shy away from, I can feel it in my body, right? And so and this is what happens. I've done my research was about the ways that we talk about what we talk about, social workers, and the ways they talk about race and racism. And so what I found was that we're avoiding, we're just silent, we're not touching it, right? And so as professionals who are working with other people, we have to be aware of what's going on within us. And so those silences are harmful, not only to other people, but to us as well. And so in order to get to those things, we have to be able to sit through that quaking, that sensation that hits the body that makes you want to run away, right? That dirty pain that makes you just want to turn away from it all and be like, nope, I'm not trying to do that, and sit with it so that we can get to the point where we're operating from the notion of clean pain. Right, that's a pain that drives you to want to heal, right? And once you get a taste of that, I've worked with quite a few folks. Once folks get a taste of that clean pain, they're like, wait a minute, it leads to liberation. It leads to to some freedom. So when you get that taste, it's like, well, hold up there, what is that? I want some more of that, right? So then it becomes easier. So you got to practice and build the muscle in order to do that. So healing for ourselves is absolutely essential, because we can do and do so much harm in not doing that.
Yeah, I love that.
It's really, I mean, you've been referencing Resmaa Menegham's work there, which is so powerful in thinking about that and wondering, as this understanding, as we have had almost this awakening in the last couple of years, or I mean, a lot of people have been awake for a long time, but I feel like there's a universal energy that's shifting, and wondering how you support yourself and the folks that you work with to be able to sit in that dirty pain to get to the place of clean, to move past dirty pain to get to a place of clean pain, and how you help them make that distinction in the work that you're doing so that we can move through that.
So one, how do I do it myself? It took a long time to get here, right? And one of the things that is important is to be able to discern, like to know when it's something is real, right? When it's happening. So being in the present, to be able to discern if it's really something I should be reacting a certain way about, or if it's something from the past, because y'all both know trauma, keeps us locked in the past, right? And so Gabrielle Monte talks about, we're living out traumatic or symptomatic scenarios, right, of past hurt, and so that's what trauma does. And so when we're talking about race, we're living these experiences of harm, reliving these experiences of harm, and so being able to sit with the question of, is this the right reaction with this person in this place at this time? Right? I think that's a really good question. I just learned that question from doing, some work with polyvagal theory, but really it's like being able to pause and orient yourself and recognize that, wait a minute, this is different. It's not, I'm not in any danger right now, right? Or maybe I am, and maybe this is the right reaction for me. But to just build up the muscle through practice, trying, thinking, like just every day. And then, inch by inch, you try it a little bit and you go, oh, I can't do that. And you try it a little bit more and you feel a little bit stronger. And so then, you're able to sit in the pain, right? You're able to sit through and recognize, oh, I'm okay now, right? When you get through, you're like, I'm okay now. It's not that bad experience that I had before. It's not my husband, and it's not my current husband, screaming and hollering, and threatening me, right? It's not that anymore. It is, I'm feeling that, but that's not what's really happening.
Yeah. So you're talking about like understanding how our past experiences impact our interpretation of our current ones and learning how to start to undo that or to have that question. Because you're right, when you have trauma, it's hard and you get thrown into often the worst case experience that you've had. And that's where you get thrown back to in those moments and you have to kind of unlearn them. I'm wondering, from your perspective, and I'd love to look into the neuroscience of this too. So there's lots of places we can go, but what's on top of my mind right now is what's the role of something like self-compassion or some of those modalities as you're starting to address the pain or the reactions to what's going on?
So I love that question because self-compassion is absolutely important to this work, right? And so when we're talking about just being able to survive, right? The strategies, right? The adaptive strategies that we use, they're called adaptive because we didn't have the resources, so we had to create something on the fly, right? And those things eventually become patterns, right? But those things, they're also called adaptive survival strategies, right? And so they helped us survive, right? And when we can look at them through the lens of, wait a minute, you kept me alive, right? And so to not be ashamed of those things that we did to stay alive, to keep functioning, because we didn't have what we needed. We didn't have the attachment that we needed. We didn't have the support that we needed. We had to create something with the little bit of stuff that we had. So when we can see those things that we have done, those strategies that we have created so that we could be here today, right? Then we can see that in a different light. And when I say that to clients, many of them are like, "What? I thought I had to, throw all that away and be ashamed of it, right?" So I tell clients like, "Look, these things kept you alive. There's some good resources in there, right? You might not need to use this thing in this way, but you need to keep that baby on the shelf, right? You don't need to just toss everything out. It's a tool, right? So we just need to look at it. We need to become friendly with it and understand how it operates so that when it is needed, we can use it in a way that doesn't harm us and doesn't harm our relationships."
I love that. I actually have done a practice around this, which I'll out myself to everybody here, which Susan will know this very well about me. I lived in a household that had a lot of challenges growing up, and I definitely developed I don't know if I want to call it a persona, but like a reaction to the situations around me that still pops up. That I call Wild Girl because I just need a name for it. And basically, it's this part of me that will jump ahead to protect me, right? So if I'm sensing threat or harm, or like I'm not going to be protected, there's a part of me that like, jumps ahead of me before I even get to get out of the gate. That's already there, like ready to fight for me, right? Ready to protect me and defend me. And for a long time, I just felt a lot of shame about that part of my personality and who I am because it doesn't work well. Like maybe it worked well when I was a kid just to help me to kind of survive those moments. But like as an adult in a professional setting, and I'm like showing my frustration, that doesn't work so well anymore. It's not like I'm like destroying rooms or anything like that, but that part of my personality that jumps ahead. And when I started to unpack, well, what is that? Like before I got to like, oh, it's this thing from my childhood. I just knew I had this tendency to like be defensive sometimes and jump ahead and be a little aggressive in meetings. And then I did the work of like, well, where did that come from? And I was like, oh, that's this part of me that showed up because I was in a place where actually, if I didn't like yell and scream, nobody saw me. And certainly nobody was going to take care of my needs. And really the only way I could get heard is if I got to that level. Like, oh, okay. So that part of me is still there showing up, trying to do the same thing, but now it's kind of like ill-advised, right? Like it doesn't work so well. It was never good, but like definitely not in a professional setting or an adult setting or any even healthy setting. But it's there, right? So I know that that's a part of my personality. And as soon as I could see like what it was trying to do and what its intentions were, then I couldn't get mad at it anymore. And when I gave it a persona, like as like a little girl, because I can see myself as that little girl, like raging at like not getting what her needs met, we're like, oh, I can attend to that. I can attend to that little girl even, rather than like beat myself up and give myself shame for having an outburst or a reaction that I would prefer not to have. So I love that you name that, because I think that's such a powerful way of starting to do it, is like, oh, okay, this is what's it trying to do. And rather than being mad at it, let's maybe retrain it. So sometimes I send, like imagine sending Wild Girl out for something like, I need your energy to go over here. I need you to help me fight in this situation, not here, but let's fight over here.
Yes.
And it's really helpful to know how to like integrate those pieces together.
Yes. Yes. I love that. Thank you. And I lost you for a second, so I didn't hear everything, but I think I caught most of it.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah. And you also, I think, have outlined that in your 3 eyes in the book,
Yeah.
and like really slowing that process down and thinking about the all of those components of how you be in relationship with that part of yourself and don't disown it, because we have to be in relationship with those survival pieces. They're part of ourselves.
Absolutely. Yeah.
With our whole selves, right? Because those pieces are, even though we want to, toss them away and not look at them because we're taught to see them as shameful, as something to be ashamed of, right? Those are things that have supported us in so many different ways, right? So it's like, how do you integrate all that and become a really whole person? And you'll find that, oh, okay, I kind of like that. And like you said, Megan, I don't, we need to redo some things here, but I definitely need your energy for this thing.
Well, we can't possibly heal unless we embrace our whole selves. Like there's no healing unless we can come and accept those parts of ourselves that aren't great. It's not, that's just I feel like that's the gig. I'm wondering how so there's a lot of conversation around like, compassion fatigue, other things like that educators are facing, where like we're trying to deal with, so we have to deal with our own stuff. That's one layer. And then we got to deal with other people. In our context, we talk about dealing with kids, but I even wonder for you as somebody who's working, like you have such a powerful role because you're helping the people that help other people. And that's such a needed role, because the helpers, and I can like name Susan as like somebody who I watch doing that all the time, right? She spends a lot of time going into school settings, helping people navigate extremely difficult and emotional spaces. And there's no one like, it's not like she gets to go back to the office and someone's like, all right, we're going to dust you off and fluff you back up again, help you feel better. Like that doesn't happen. Right. So someone like you is incredibly important, but I also wonder about your capacity to do that, because that's hard too. Like, so I guess one of them is like, how did you come to starting to help the helpers? Why was that what you were like, where you went? And then how do you help yourself?
So I got to this place because of my own burnout, right? For me, with my history of trauma, with trauma, you lose your authentic self. And so as a helper, it's easy to be like, I'm helping those people, and look at me, look at this wonderful person who's doing all this work.
I know what you're talking about.
I've never heard Susan front like that.
And I was I was overly engaged, and it was like, yes, they're calling me. It wasn't like right here and me saying it out of my mouth, but there's just like this felt need for people to need me. right?
Right. Yeah.
And then you find yourself like doing this and working 12 hours a day and trying to do all this, and your body's telling you, hey, I need you to slow down. But I'm like, no, we got to keep going because, I'm helping people because that's what I want to do. I came here to do this, right? And then pretty soon it was like, wham, I hit a wall. I mean, and I hit that wall hard, right? So it was like, and I didn't have anybody to say, hey, what's happening here? The ways that we have, that our programs are structured, they're structured to produce, right? So there's no place in there for you to be like, oh, I need to take this break. I need to do my lunch break. It's like you sacrifice yourself, well, because I need to get this done. And they're like, oh, you got that done? Well, let me give you 12 more things, right? And let me give you a caseload of 300 people and expect you to do this and do all this crazy stuff, right? And so I hit that wall and was like, I didn't have anyone there to dust me off. I didn't have anyone there prior to help direct me and say, hey, Cherie, what's happening here? You're doing a whole lot of crazy stuff right now. I need you to look at that. Even our education, right? Our educations my education did not prepare me for this, right? It did not prepare me to take care of myself. It was about, you're always helping other people. You're always giving yourself away at any expense. And we have this notion of selflessness.
It's a badge of honor.
It is a badge of honor. And in selflessness, what does that mean? You don't have your own damn self. And so I found myself without a self. And it was like, I can't do that. I cannot do that anymore. And so it was a long way up. I had to claw my way up. And I quit my job and I went into PhD study, which actually in hindsight really helped me reorganize and see myself differently. So actually, as much work as it was, that my PhD journey was a healing process. And it literally, helped me see race differently and see myself differently. And that built my confidence up. And so, that's how I got there, was like recognizing that I didn't have anything and I'm watching everybody else struggle. Right. So it was like, and because I didn't have anybody to talk to. When this happens, you have supervisors, but nobody's talking about race. Nobody's talking about these difficult things. Nobody's talking about how you need to care for yourself, because it's such an emotional drain. It's such a physical drain. And because we're all living it every day, none of us escapes, racialization. We're all in it, right? And so we just don't know that it's always present, it's always navigating, it's always making its way, evolving. So that's how I got there.
So this is a great time for our first break. And when we come back, I'm really, there's a couple areas I'm really interested in going, and I want to think about like, how do we support our educators and our caregivers to then take this lesson that you've learned and bring it into the everyday. Because I really this year have watched what was already bandwidth stretched beyond reasonable. Now just sort of all of the educators I know are really very dangerously close to burnout in a way that I haven't seen in the 25 years that I've been working in education. So I'd love to think about what are some takeaways we can bring, or how do we start to bring this discourse back into our public forums. We will be right back. And we are back. Welcome back. This is the Awakening Educator. And today we're having a really powerful conversation with Cherie Bridges Patrick around the importance of self-care, of looking at trauma, and talking about racialized trauma and the way it impacts our whole community, and the importance of social justice in caring for each other and caring for ourselves. Was that a good summary of what we've been talking about so far? Yeah, and before we went on break, I started to ask questions around knowing that where we are in this moment in our culture, in our history, coming out of the pandemic of COVID-19, new understanding about the pandemic of racism and the way that it impacts and white supremacy and the way it impacts so much of everyday experiences of folks. What are some of the ways that we need to be pushing back on what's happening? And those that are being charged with educating our kids and helping our kids and helping our families and helping our communities. Like, how do we start to push back so that this can be more of a sustainable healing and education system that allows for liberation and thriving? So that's just a small question.
So I would start by one, acknowledging that we have never been here before, right? And so navigating this uncertainty, this chaos, this, we're always, it's the ground is always shifting, right? And so, I go back to how do we build neural resilience, right? This muscle, because I think that's what it's going to take. It's going to take a collective group, a larger group of people to say, you know what? I'm not going to do that anymore. I'm going to have to live my life differently because, all these things, these social pressures, the way that our systems are structured, it's about production, and you're a widget, right? And so how do you see yourself as a human being? And then when you finally recognize, well, wait a minute, I'm not a widget. I have feelings, I have needs, I have a family, I have a life, right? Then that drive starts to set in, and we can then begin to, to have the willingness, right? The willingness to do something different. Because if we're not ready, like many of us have not been ready, because there's a lot of fear. Trauma creates all this fear. Trauma creates a sense of unsafety, and so we get that willingness to start to try things differently. I think what we're seeing now, there's a lot of voices that are out there like, nope, we ain't doing this no more, right? Mm-hmm. And so we tap into that. We tap into other people. We do a collective, right? And we help one another navigate. We help educate one another as to the day-to-day needs. When I'm talking about safety, I'm talking about an embodied safety, a sense of felt safety in my person, right? And when I can do that, there's a sense of confidence that I get that allows me to see myself as a human being that is inherently, right? That is inherently entitled to dignity, safety, and belonging, right? Those are inherent with me. That's what I'll say. I mean, what do y'all say?
Well, I think you're right. I mean, I think what I heard you say is we need to start setting those boundaries for ourselves. I think often what I see and hear from educators is they're waiting for someone else, they're waiting for policymakers or principals or whomever your person is above you to suddenly clear the way for things to feel better. And that's not going to happen because that's not the system that we exist within. Because I'll tell you, the principals, for the most part, and they're victims of the system too. I'm not calling out principals, but anybody who continues to advance in education tend to be those A students of the current system, right? And I am one of them. So you guys are social workers. I'm the dreaded district office person. And I'll tell you, I worked really hard as a teacher. I showed a lot of leadership promise. So, of course, I started getting loaded on with stuff the second I, 23 or 24 years old and started leading things. School administrator, same thing. And then district administrator, like that's who we're dealing with.
Right.
And so waiting for those folks who have been trained and had it be reinforced positively that overwork is the way to go, you're going to be waiting a really long time. They're also under an incredible amount of pressure too. So, it's not like a lack of care or empathy. We've all been trained to subscribe to the system. They are also overworked. So I will say that almost no one I've seen in education in any role, I don't care what it is not overworked.
Yeah, absolutely.
Every single person, cafeteria workers, our custodians, central office folks, admin assistants, teachers, every single person along the system is overworked. And so I think the only way for us to be able to move forward is to start to set those boundaries for ourselves and to model. And I try and get leaders to model like stepping away and the power of that. I also actually often use neuroscience for that benefit.
Mm-hmm.
So to start to talk about like, actually there's a law of diminishing returns here. So the more you kind of overwork yourself, actually the less effective you are.
Yes.
You start undermining your own efforts. So like, so I try and use those kinds of things, like what rest does for your body, that actually if you rest and you step away, you're more efficient when you get back into it again. Like anything I can to help people feel some confidence in taking their hands off, like to letting go a little bit, because there's such a tight, like almost death grip on work and on effort. So how to like start to loosen that a little bit. I think it's the only way we can do it. And if enough people start saying no, then we have some collective capacity. But I hate it when I see people say, well, I have to wait for someone else to tell me it's okay. Because you're probably going to keep waiting, because it's just, our system isn't set up for anything different until we all agree to change that. And that's going to take a lot more than, there are definitely great bosses and people who do it on like small isolated levels, but like, I don't know. That's my thought.
I wonder what you're saying too, is that I know we have a national teacher shortage. People are not entering the field anymore because it's underpaid and overworked, and people are leaving because for the same reasons that we've been talking about, that the system does not allow for opportunity to reflect or to support or to grow. And I'm wondering I'm hopeful, because I tend to be a pretty hopeful person, that this is part of what you were referencing, in that navigating the waters, right? That we're in a moment of transition, that there has to be this sort of the collie of destruction before we can actually reimagine. And I really thought we were there with the pandemic. Like I really thought, like, okay, it was amazing what educators did at this moment. Right? In that moment in time, what they did, how they reorganized, how they rethought the way in which they did education on so quickly. And Megan, you talked a lot about this, like the pivot that educators were able to make to reimagine things. And that we're always talking about, it takes all this time, and they were able to do it like that. And for some reason, though, we bounced right back to the system as it was before, with more demand.
You know what I think that is, though, Susan, as you were talking, sorry, I cut you off. So I think we were able to make that pivot quickly, and it was miraculous. But you know why? And it's just because this conversation made me realize it, because we all overworked our tails off to get ourselves to that place. And we thought, and I think this is part of why the burnout is so extreme now. I have no way of validating it. It's just my notion. But like, we were holding on, right? Like, okay, I'm going to like tough it out and push through. And then schools are going to reopen and things are going to get easier and our kids will be back, and we'll be able to let go of some of this effort. And instead of that being the case, it's been the opposite, right? Yeah. Where actually, or not the opposite, but I guess it continues to be incredibly difficult. And actually, as kids are coming back, they're experiencing and expressing their trauma from what happened. And it's just as difficult a place as it was last year. But I think there was this sense of like, okay, and everybody kept saying it, and I kept saying in board meetings, everyone, I'm like, folks, it's not over when school comes back together. Like, let me guarantee this isn't like we haven't reached a finish line. But I think a lot of people thought that. I don't know what you guys think, but as you were talking, I'm like, right. I think people were just like overworking, because they're like, I'm going to white knuckle it through here, and we're going to get past this moment, and then we're going to reopen school. And then that didn't happen. And then it's like, well, wait a minute.
No, though, Megan, because people were overworking, but I talked to teachers about the impact of being able to go to the bathroom in the middle of the day.
Right.
Or to reorganize their time, right, in the way that they were able to work with small groups and still meet all of their kids. So it was super heavy lift at the beginning, but then there was this period of time when they got the rhythm of it, and they could take care of their biological needs throughout the day, like the most basic needs of like getting a drink of water and going to the bathroom, because you can't leave.
They had some different, I see. Interesting.
Right?
Interesting.
And so there were these things at which they were like, oh, when I take care of my biological needs.
Cherie agrees with you. Clearly the social workers are on the subject.
It's amazing having a drink of water. Oh my.
I know.
Yeah. And so that comes back to the space where you can't leave, you're sort of tethered in this structure. If you have 30 kids all at once, they're with you all day. And you have to make a choice between making photocopies for the afternoon during recess time or going to the bathroom. Like, honestly.
Right. Yeah. I know that was, it's my fear. I feel like incontinence is in my future because I mean, sorry, I'm giving a lot of personal information today, but like, I mean, it was truly like, it was an active fear. It's still an active fear because I'm like, right, the number of years where I did not go to the bathroom, where I got past the dangerous point of having to go to the bathroom, and I'm teaching anyway because that's what we have to do.
Right.
It's bad.
Yeah.
Sorry,
and then the inequitable way that this pandemic has hit our communities, right? And so the communities are coming back, and the amount of grief and loss and loss of home, loss of family, loss of health, it has not proportionately hit our communities equally. So,
right. So I want to say two things to that. We've kind of spoken about it, but I want to name it. There is a risk, right? There is a huge risk for loss in taking a stand, right? When we decide, okay, you know what, I'm not going to do this anymore, we know intuitively, because the way the system works, they will replace me in a heartbeat, right? Because the system does not, it's not a human system, right? It doesn't care about that for the most part, right? And so it's like, am I willing to, can I even risk losing my job? Because I got mouths to feed, or I have a mortgage to pay, right? So there's all these things that are looming, which is why the collective is needed. The other point that I want to reemphasize, and Susan, you brought it up, is reimagination, right? Having the capacity to do that. But what we know about the body and trauma is that when the body has been impacted by trauma, we lose our sense of safety. We don't have we lack the capacity to think and reimagine, right? We lose the space to be able to do that. And so since we are all living under the influence of social trauma, right? We're all living under it because we can't escape it. We are all impacted by that. And our ability to imagine, I think, has, it's been constricted a lot, right? And so I know that the more healing that I do, the more imagination I have, the more creativity I have, the more confidence I have. And so I just wanted to make those 2 points because I think they're really important to this conversation.
I so appreciate you naming that. And I'm realizing as we're talking, we actually haven't even talked really about how we start to do this healing work together. So I think the collective is important. So I appreciate you bringing that forward. I always lean to individuals first. So I'm like, at least you can start with yourself. But I agree, the social pressures on putting that boundary up are extreme. And as a single parent myself, I spent most of my life overworking and being afraid because there's a lot of fear. Yeah, I don't even know where to go with my quest because I feel like we've been going all over the place in like such a powerful conversation around how we start to address our trauma.
I'm wondering, Megan, as you talk about collective, because this is where a lot of my heart has been lately, and I appreciate you bringing it back in, is the important role of joy, and how we, in healing, rethinking what healing is, rethinking what a healing and therapeutic environment can be. And we need some folks that have the breadth and space, that have done the work to be able to reimagine, and then to be able to support the collective. Like, how do we create that really push so that we're creating safety so people can start to join the vision of, it doesn't have, we can't have joy. We can move towards joy as a collective healing practice through dance, through art, through music, through learning, through growing. And so there is the individual work. And I think, again, I'm going back to your book, Megan, this idea of like the individual and the collective is really there. Like, we have to do our own work to be a part of the collective. And then the collective can help us continue to do our own work. And it becomes this reinforcing, supportive space.
Yeah.
And so really thinking about our work, and you as a coach, and you still in it for now, like how do we create these collective spaces where people can show up in their vulnerability and their pain, but also experience joy in the coming together of seeing each other as their whole selves.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. How do you do that, Cherie?
We're asking you all the hard questions.
We're making you solve all of our problems. So
yeah.
Go for it.
So I think that it starts small, right? Like in a group this size or maybe slightly higher, right? And we have to create spaces for safety, right? We have to become safely embodied. So I have to, like right now, I feel totally comfortable. This is out of, the ordinary for me in terms of doing a presentation, but it's not a presentation. It's like, it's a natural conversation. So I feel absolutely calm, right? To be able to recognize what's happening in my body so that when I join with somebody, I can know that, okay, I need some water. My heart's racing a little bit. These are things that are happening to me. And so when I come in, I can say, I'm a little bit nervous right now. So what's happening with me, or I got some family issues going on. So starting small where we can create a sense of vulnerability. Well, do we know what vulnerability is? Vulnerability, the definition for vulnerability is open to attack.
Oh,
right?
wow.
So who wants to be open to attack? But in order for us to, and vulnerability is absolutely where we need to go. But how can I do that if I am always, guarding myself because I feel like I have to protect myself against this person. So starting small and being willing to take the chance to make mistakes because there's gonna be the mistakes, right? So driving towards that clean pain, right? Recognizing that there's that dirty pain, calling it what it is. Oh, here's some of that nasty stuff right here, right? Being able to call it out in a group that is committed to the same thing. Right. So there's this willingness, this commitment to the work, right. To be able to navigate the vicissitudes of all of everything that it takes, because it's a rocky road. Right. But when you've got people supporting you, you can do it. The other thing is, yes, we absolutely have to do our individual work, but the real work comes between others. And that's, that's, from a neuroscience perspective, right? And so we co-regulate like this. To me, this is a co-regulating experience because we're just bouncing back and forth. We got a cadence going on, right? There's a dance, there's a movement and everything happening. And so when we can do that, that's when the healing happens. And when we can when we're in the moment, right? When that crisis hits or when that moment hits and I feel like I want to run away, to be able to sit through that, right? That's when I know how much work I've done, not just how much work I've done, how effective the work I've done individually is. Because the work doesn't really start until we're working with each other. Because I can be zen all day long at home because there's nothing pressuring me to do anything. Right. Yeah. And so it's when we're in the conversation and somebody says something, I'm like, oh, snap, did you say that? Right. And it's off to the races.
Yeah. This was such I can't believe we're already actually at time, which is hard for me to believe because we're needing to wrap up in a few minutes here. But I think what you're naming is so powerful. And I appreciate that we actually came back to safety at the end and you naming like what that safety looks like for you and your ability to also like I love just even the simplicity of like, I'm feeling nervous right now, or I'm feeling uncomfortable right now. And what that does to help us to just let go. And what a gift it is to other people so that they know where you're coming from and they're not just interpreting. And I love the definition of vulnerability because it's the name of the game and it open ourselves to attack. Like, wow.
There's one thing I want to reflect on too of what you brought, which has been so important to me in my work. I think when I started clinically and I was being called into situations where kids were very escalated and at risk of harming themselves or others, I spent a lot of time focusing on the other, on that child or on that person. And as you were talking, now I spend most of that time focusing on what's happening internally for me in that moment, and that the importance of being able to do that in relationship and in our nervous systems interacting with each other, so that what I'm doing is actually using my nervous system to help that person calm down.
Right.
And that was such an aha for me as a clinician. That the work is about me, but it's really about me in relationship to what's happening around me. And if I haven't done my own work, I can't be in relationship to what's happening around me, but I also have to be in something that's around me to be able to be in that emotionally charged space, to be able to change and transform. And so really important, powerful, and I also feel like we have this cadence, which is, it's an honor when you're in spaces with people and you can allow your nervous system to be in that rhythmic space. So it really has been this really super synergistic conversation, which I value.
I want Cherie to come back. Don't you want Cherie to come back?
And you can see it's a good thing we're on something, because I'm about to be like in the dark, like.
Yeah, I mean, I saw Cherie nodding a lot as you were talking, Susan, and it's something that we talked. Where I used to work, we talked a lot about it, and it goes back to your point, Cherie, around like we have to attend to ourselves, but our nervous systems are the intervention. Our nervous systems are it's what we have. It's and we need it for ourselves, but it's a reason why we can't burn ourselves out, why we can't stretch ourselves too thin, because our nervous systems are the thing that actually has the greatest power to create the change in the spaces that we're in, wherever we are. So it's, even if you don't want to do it for yourself, like if you want to be an effective teacher, you want to do less classroom discipline or whatever your situation is, all roads lead back to regulate your nervous system, become aware of it, because that'll actually help you as well. Cherie, how do people find out about you? What kind of work, like how can people, if they want to know more about you and work with you, how do they do that?
Sure. I've got a website, and I don't know if there's a link I can share somewhere on your site, but it's Cherie Bridges Patrick, PhD.com. It's long. And it's a newer website, so I'm building it and putting information on there. I've got, I just put a new resource on there today, and I've got some more resources that I'm going to add that talk about, the work with the nervous system and just safety, right? And how our bodies are always sending cues of safety or danger, right? Through eye contact, through the voice, and all kinds of stuff. So that's one way. I'm on LinkedIn, but do I know my LinkedIn address? Can I give that to you?
I think I actually have it, because I have. But yes, people can come find you. I literally have LinkedIn up just a second ago. I'll look for it. Because
if you post it, I'll try and post it here on the video. I think I tried to tag you, but I'm not sure I did.
So is there a way? Do I put it in the comment section? Because I'm happy.
Yeah, if you put it in the comment section, it will put it up on the screen.
Let's do that. I can do that.
Yeah, if you put in the comments, and it's Cherie Bridges Patrick, LSW, PhD.
That's too much.
All the good stuff. No, that's all.
You earned it. Be out there with it. It's hard work to get a PhD.
Yeah, well, that's true.
No joke. Yeah, you gotta earn that. I gotta own that. So that's what's on LinkedIn as well. So yeah, okay, great. So you do that in the private chat.
Give me a second.
I got it. I can do it in the comments. Such an honor to have you here. Oh, Susan, can you do it? I don't know how to do it.
Yeah, I'm good.
I act like I can be helpful. It's not even cute. All right. So that's now attached to Facebook.
Okay.
There.
Awesome.
This is such
and it will also be on the video. So.
It'll also be on the video, right? Yeah, it's in the video.
Okay.
It's such a treat to talk with you. I'm so grateful for your time and for what you're doing in the world, and the fact that you're caring for the caretakers is just, it couldn't be more huge. So thank you.
Thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure. I've just thoroughly enjoyed this. Thank you.
Oh, good. Thank you so much. Thanks, everyone. If you like what you heard, don't turn it off yet, Susan. We have to do our thing.
I know. We gotta say like it.
We always forget. Like us, like the video. Please share this with others. Leave comments. You can do them after the video has been recorded, but definitely please like us and let other people know about us. We're locatable on every possible podcast platform you can find. So yeah, please spread the word. And thank you, Dr. Cherie Bridges Patrick, for being with us today.
Thank you so much.
All right.